Hey, geographer friends. It's a little bit of part two with our introduction to maps for Unit 1 for human geography. Notice I have the correct word up there today, and I have new flowers for today, so I hope you enjoy them. Let's get right to it. So, we've been reviewing a lot of these ideas in the introduction to this course because we really want you to look at the big picture before we get into all the details in the unit. And part of the big picture is that you want to constantly, as a geographer, looking for patterns. So remember back in like kindergarten, first grade, you were recognizing patterns, drawing patterns. You're doing the same thing, just with a lot cooler stuff than just beads or blocks or whatever you made patterns with back in the day. So we're looking at geospatial data for our patterns. So geospatial. So, you know, something connected to a place, connected to a specific place on this wonderful earth. And here's some ways to keep in mind as you do this. The first thing when you look for patterns and you look at maps and you describe location, you're going to think either absolute or relative. So when you describe an area absolutely, basically you're going to include numbers. You're giving specifics to give a very specific point on this earth. So, for example, today we were honoring the anniversary of 9/11, and Boonton High School is exactly 38 and a half miles from the Freedom Tower, right? So that's an absolute location. You could also give like the coordinates for where Boonton High School is. Give the longitude and the latitude, right? That's another example of absolute data. Now, the opposite of that, I guess it's opposite, would be relative. So you're just comparing, like, well, this compared to that is here. You're not really giving like exact numbers and figures here. So you can say Boonton High School is near Route 287. It doesn't say how near, it is near, right? Now I can also say my house is near Boonton High School. It is Route 287 is much closer, right? You can see it from some classrooms. Now, sure, I could ride. Like, what does that mean? I could ride my bike there. I can walk there. It's a short drive there, right? Near is sort of a vague word. It's not saying my house is 2.8 miles from Boonton High School. If someone asks where the gym is, and I say it's on the other side of the school to our classroom, that doesn't mean you're going to know exactly where it is or how to get there. Just you have an idea of it being on the other side. So there's another trick when you look for patterns and processes. AP Classroom suggested this acronym, ESPN. I mean, I like sports, so that works, but they're sort of shady because the N is really environmental. But if it helps you remember, there's other ones we'll learn probably in a week or two that are similar. But when you look for patterns, look for economic patterns, right? Things that deal with income, money, taxes, resources, right? Things like that. So I made that green. Social cultural, I made that brown for Thanksgiving because it's a popular cultural holiday in our country. So things that do with society, cultures, right? It might deal with religion or language. Now, notice some can be a little bit of both. So, something can be an economic factor and also a social cultural factor, right? So, keep that in mind. Political, I put purple because red and blue, the two parties mixed to purple. And then environmental, that's blue water, right? So, it are all these cities. So, when we look at capitals in class, like why are most capitals near water, right? Um, Here's an example of a map that shows economic factors in New Jersey. So the darker shade of green are the higher income in New Jersey. Look at that, some high income areas. In Morris County, we know some of those areas nearby. Um, and some of the more agricultural areas or more urban areas have some of the lower income. I mean, there's nothing in much of that area but like pine trees and like some cows, right? So keep things in mind. Now, also you should know what type of map that is, right? With the different shades, right? So the different colors are a way. Remember, we learned that as a type of thematic map, right? Also think of how might these patterns present themselves. So, like, is there a pattern to that to that green. Like maybe you can connect the pattern, extending from Philadelphia to New York, or maybe, you're focusing it on like different areas, or, is there a pattern or is there not? Well, you can have clustered patterns. So think of like a lot of what do you see in the pattern, especially maybe in a dot map, that's another thematic map, is clustered together. So these are the maps we looked at today about the unfortunate victims from 9/11 and where they came from. So you see a lot are just clustered around that New York City area. If the dots were to be all throughout the United States, which they weren't, right? There were people from throughout the United States, but not like clustered together. If they were spread out, they would be dispersed. If they were spread out evenly, they would be uniform. And if they were just like random, you know what random means, and they were random. This is the point in the video where I hope you're not just copying down the words on the screen and actually listening to what I say, right? Because you want to make sure you know the difference of these terms. And so here's another example. We're going to keep coming back to this map, this McDonald's map. So like, what do we see here? Like, and this is a little bit of, how would you explain this? Because there are areas that are clustered, right? Especially that corridor from DC to Boston. We'll learn the name for that corridor. Where it's more dispersed out in the West, especially the Midwest, right? It's not really uniform anywhere. Would you say it's random in some areas, if some areas are clustered and some are dispersed? But where they're clustered, like think why? Is there a higher population density? Is it along like highways, so there would be more rest stops? Is it along water routes? I don't know, right? Is it because, just think, like, what is there a reason why it's clustered or where it's dispersed where it is? One more map. We'll look at a topographical map. I know someone referred to a topographical map. We study topography of the Earth. You're mostly studying elevation. When I was in the Army, these are the kind of maps we looked at all the time. So if we know we needed to get from point A to point B, and we were in the woods, and we had so much time to get there, and we had to carry heavy things, right? Do we want to try to avoid the hilly section, even if it was a little bit longer to go around in the flat, right? Or were we, how steep was it, right? So I should find an elevation map of the Torn. That would be relevant to us, right? Keep in mind, what type of map is this? It's an isoline map, right? We see all those little squiggly lines. All right, guys. Let's learn some more geography tomorrow.